Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Scott Latimer, and I lead the health sector for Gensler. That for us is healthcare, senior living, sciences, and wellness. But in my day job, I work with health systems on innovation topics, and really excited to be with you today. And with my partner Dave Johnson, and I'll just, as Dave introduces himself, say that. He's the person that your CEO probably reads on what's next in healthcare.
Well, Scott, what a nice thing to say. I am Dave Johnson. I'm the CEO of Foresight Health. I am a recovering or repurposing healthcare investment banker. I in my time, funded over $30 billion of healthcare bond issues to do the kinds of things that you all build. And in the last 6 years, I've been doing penance because I've helped fund the overbuilding of the system. And I'm going to be talking to you today about the great decentralization of healthcare. Okay,
great. So I believe that our slides are going to come up. There they are. Dave and I are going to try to divide our time a bit to have me speak a bit about some of the forces and some of the things that we're seeing. And, then Dave will talk about kind of where it's going. I think, we are definitely an outside the box choice for this kind of conference and this audience. You're not going to learn any project delivery techniques here, but I believe that the role of the chief facility officer is changing, and that you're gonna have a seat at the strategic table for your health system if you're able to bring more than schedule and budget expertise, but able to really help them think through the topics about how to invest strategically, and that's really what we're going to try to get at. So. A lot of folks talk about forces, and then they immediately describe a payment issue or something like that. I'm going to try to elevate that conversation a bit. There's a little bit of time on sort of humanity, technology, and then the experience of care. And this is not a new topic. It's we're better now than we were 100 or 500 or 1,000 years ago, but we've plateaued, and the average lifespan of someone in the United States has actually declined in the last year, primarily due to COVID, but in the last 5 years has actually declined slightly, the expected life, at birth. And so there are some things obviously that are going on in our cities and our environments and so forth that are contributing to that. And there are issues in cities that are pretty foundational. There are a lot of people that are leaving cities and saying that they're not coming back around the world. I was actually reading the other day that the problem actually isn't as much with people leaving as that nobody's coming to cities right now. So the recent graduates, the people moving for jobs when all jobs are virtual. So what we're not doing is we're not seeing any backfilling. But major cities in the United States on the metropolitan area level, are somewhat declining, and there are some population migrations, underway. And if we're to keep the places we live viable, we're going to have to intervene more than just with specialty care. We're going to need to take a more holistic approach, and this is going to be kind of all of us, every project stuff. These are the things that people in our survey work tell us are the things that really contribute to their satisfaction with access and so forth. And what this gets us to is the idea that that we need a broader design brief than just kind of exam rooms and operating rooms and that kind of thing. I've only seen one request for proposal in recent memory that includes anything in its guiding principles, anything like this about. But these are the things that really impact human health. And, as long as we focus only on care, as you read about social determinants and everything, that we're kind of missing the larger need and the larger opportunity. So there is an element of kind of thinking about the arc of human health and this group's ability to impact that we need to focus on. There's a second seismic shift that is underway, and that our industry is finally embracing technology. I'm sure everybody's seen this or something like it. This is from the Chartis website, and they do a great job of kind of tracking telehealth adoption. But, telehealth's really only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to technology, but, and particularly in the built environment. Environments in other industries, think airports, think retail, think, hospitality, are really tech-enabled environments, and ours are going to increasingly be there. And so, being able to map kind of human movement through space and really tune the performance of an asset through technology is something that is on the horizon, and I think is part of kind of everything going forward. So, like I said, telehealth's kind of a simpler, or it's a more sort of definable problem in the near term, but nonetheless, the access, the impact is significant. Yeah, the biggest impact with telehealth really is that it is kind of every provider all the time. And so the idea of building kind of telehealth command centers may work for a few subspecialists, but it's going to be in every provider's workday, and the ability to kind of have physical patients and virtual patients come back and forth and have the environment actually support more than just, the caregiver sitting in their home on their laptop, but really being able to do everything from, background to being able to conference in different ways is going to just require you, be able to put the environments together differently.
Hey, Scott, I get a kick out of the fact we even call it telehealth, right? We don't talk about telebanking anymore. It's just health.
Right.
We're almost using antiquated technology.
I mean, the ATM, right? We used to call the ATM. Now it's just going to the bank. Nobody expects you're going to be dealing with a human, right?
Yeah.
And virtual healthcare, of course, is taking many forms, right, Dave? And so if you're a chronic patient and you're now getting mailed a box of gizmos that are able to monitor your chronic conditions, at scale, at distance, and so it's a very different world, and yet we're still kind of trying to adapt this current asset base to this problem, right? So this is a conference that talks a lot about lean delivery. I thought I'd bring a little heresy here. You actually, who says all exam rooms need to be the same size, and with the same kind of, equipment and layout? What we do in them is different, and the patient needs are different. And technology's enabling us really to get to mass customization. Again, aviation can get millions of people to the right gate, usually get their bags to the right city with them. And, we know why patients are coming. AI is going to tell us with pretty good certainty what we're going to need to do when they're there. And so, why not start to vary the facility to in terms of room size and that kind of thing, to really, take care of those patients that don't have to disrobe. Those patients are going to have a procedure and not just an exam. And then, thinking about capacity, how do we start to factor these things like virtual care in? How's it going to impact our capacity need? In this example, a third of the exam room need, based on this scenario of kind of modeling how telehealth was going to impact it, is no longer needed. But those caregivers needed a place that wasn't just a desk in the middle of a busy, hub of an ambulatory facility to actually focus on and conduct those visits. And then ultimately technology is going to enable us, for this crowd to really start to look at where we are locating geographically and, potentially affect significant savings in the cost of the delivery system. You're not going to have to equip it, and what you're going to have to equip will be, a much more kind of nimble asset and so forth. And so a second design brief beyond the human health one is one for asset performance. The tools are increasingly there that are going to enable us to think about patients and their needs differently, to expect them and anticipate their needs, and then track how the facility is used in a way that enables us really to kind of turn up the performance. And then, the final thing I'll just touch on here, and then a couple of provocations for you. But, this Dave and I were invited here because we wrote an article together last fall that was called "Where Have All the Patients Gone?" And this is one of the illustrations from that article, and that's why this one is "Where Are All the Patients Going?" But the idea here is that it's strange to me that care has always focused on process and not on kind of emotional state of patient. And so the idea that there are practical needs and emotional needs, and this mass customization that technology is going to enable us to sort of meet these various kinds of patients, anxious or pragmatic or resolute, whatever they are, at where they kind of need help, and really kind of have this mass customization. So rather than being one size fits all like we have been, we'll be able to be much more, kind of sensitive and probably deliver better care. And so, there's a lot of talk about patient experience. It actually is something that now can be measured. And so we can measure throughput and process stuff. We can also measure experience and know if we're delivering on that. And there are lots of places that you can intervene in the patient's journey, from home to care, if they even have to come to you physically, and back again. So, care will increasingly be moving to the home, but it'll also be, kind of much more ubiquitous and sort of everywhere. And so I think with this as sort of, as sort of setup, I just wanted to, kind of throw some things out there that, Dave, I think when we get to, conversation, you and I can, kind of talk about. I think one of them is this idea of why isn't a hospital or a care facility a mixed-use environment? Why are we kind of single use? Oh, that's our business. But maybe our business is elevating the health of humanity, and maybe that requires partnerships. So where, depending on where you are, you're talking about recreation, food, access to the outdoors, things like that. And so really beginning to think about, how many healthcare campuses are in, towns where there are no good food options, and so nothing nutritious. Why can't, or even a good restaurant, and why can't the health campus be that way? The other thing is about repurposing infrastructure. So this is an example in London, where, land is scarce, and it's a place called Cavendish Square that's very close to where all of the academic kind of specialty care goes on in London. And this is an underground parking garage that is being repurposed for mixed use and healthcare uses, which, preserves the infrastructure. Obviously, in a city like London, that is a big deal. But also is something that really enables kind of, us to create new capacity where there isn't, without having to tear things down and build something new. Another one is, who says we have to? Who says we even have to build on the ground? Right. This was a competition for a project where the existing hospital, about 5 stories tall, needed to be replaced while it stayed in operation. And the solution that was offered here was to build above the existing hospital while it operates. And rather than heel toeing your way through the campus and trying to kind of replace a piece at a time, moving that investment up actually made it cheaper, brought more care sooner, and then the ground plane was demolished and returned to the community as a place with a great little microclimate of breezes and so forth that could be accessed by the entire community. And then finally, this idea of really what is the real need. I think a lot of health care is about kind of a push mentality, when really what we need is a pull mentality to bring services so the communities can kind of bring services that they need their way. This is a concept for kind of a kit of parts that can be delivered to a community that can be set up in a repurposed abandoned storefront that enables really you to focus on care as a minority of the issue and really building community and creating safety and access to food and those sorts of things. This is connected to a health system, but it's not of a health system. This is really kind of owned by the community. It's health as a public utility. So I'll kind of end my start of the conversation with the idea that, this is, there's kind of, healthcare is a sum of different parts, like the sign on the left. And, that there's a lot of noise. Really distilling the signal, I think, is the challenge for the projects of the future. And, Dave's point, there is a difference between doing things right and doing the right things.
Great. Well, thanks, Scott. Interesting, very interesting, provocative talk. You started with a quote from Aristotle about cities, and it reminded me of my first boss's desk. He had a stone on there, and it was the city creed of Athens. And it basically, all the members of the city government took an oath to leave the city in better shape than they found it. And wouldn't it be a great oath for all of us if we could leave the healthcare system in better shape than we find it? Because quite honestly, the fact that life expectancy in the United States is declining is not a good signal for our leadership as a whole. So I thought many of your comments about health as a public utility and addressing the emotions and so on really important. Also, comment about gizmos. My favorite gizmo is my Apple Watch. Right, it's amazing how much of a slave I've become to it. And we've gotten a lot of snow in Chicago the last couple of weeks, and I went out one day and shoveled for an hour and a half and only got 5 minutes of exercise credit. So if Steve Jobs were still around, I'd be screaming at him to fix that algorithm. But anyway, I'm going to speak just from notes. It's like that old adage: those who can speak extemporaneously, those who can't use slides. So I'm going to.
Thanks for that, Dave.
Thought you'd enjoy that. So I'm going to talk about the great decentralization in 3 parts. And the first part is the article that Scott and I co-wrote, Where Have All the Patients Gone?, which is a subset of this larger question of where are all the patients going. And then I'm going to talk specifically about what's driving movement in healthcare and healthcare services from a macro perspective, and then get more granular and talk more micro about individual markets and what to look for. So where have all the patients gone, macro and micro? You're going to feel like an economist by the end of this, I promise you. So what motivated Scott and I to write the article initial article was some research that Gensler put together, which was really interesting. They do these quick hitting surveys all over the world, and they discovered that after COVID hit not only the United States but the world, people stopped going to hospitals, and they particularly stopped going to hospitals once they, here in the States, once they stopped doing elective surgeries. And then when they could start doing them again, most of us expected that there would be some pent-up demand and we'd see more people coming for elective surgery rather than to make up for all the lost surgeries. And that turned out not to be true at all. And the Gensler survey said that somewhere in the neighborhood of a third of people were scared to go back into hospitals. And that's where the title came from. So where have these 35% of patients gone? Where have all the patients gone? And Scott's comment about one size fits all kind of correlates to the historic, taken from Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. That if you just put up a healthcare facility, the nature of demand and, the way that doctors refer patients, it would fill it up. Well, it turns out that with people scared to go in the hospital, if you really wanted to win back all your patients, you had to think about these different personas and how they approach the decision to get care. And the idea that, if someone's scared, that you should know about that in advance and pre-visit, prepare for it, orchestrate your visit in such a way, and then your post-visit activities, that if you do that really well, you'll get back not only the patients you lost, but then some. And it's not like this is a radical idea. Those of us who shop in any retail store in America will know that the smart companies figured out a long time ago that we're all motivated somewhat differently, wired somewhat differently, and they have different strategies for each one of us. It's only gotten worse in the digital age to the point where, if they've figured out that you're going to have a baby, suddenly you get all kinds of media in the mail, offering you diapers and baby cribs and that kind of thing. So that not one size fits all is really important. And I thought Gensler had done a remarkable job of really thinking through, based on its survey work, the different types of personas, and had some concrete strategies for going about them. So healthcare is personal. It's experience-based. From everything we know, engagement of customers is the secret to long-term relationships and people coming back. And the ability to use not only design, but service delivery as a way to build that kind of loyalty by actually listening to people and really solving their needs is a cornerstone of American business. It just happens to be something we haven't done enough of, or anywhere near enough of, in healthcare. So I don't think we're going back. So the question is, where do we go from here? And that's a nice kind of transition into some of the macro forces that are reshaping healthcare delivery. And I'm going to start the date of modern American medicine with the opening of Johns Hopkins Medical School in 1893. They imported what was then the most advanced method for education and treatment, was the German model. And it'll sound familiar to you because that has become the model for medical education and treatment in the United States. So it was 2 years of science, followed by 2 years of rotations, and then a residency in a hospital in order to perfect your craft. And so that was radical in the 1890s. In the 1910s, a report called the Flexner Report came out and used the Johns Hopkins model to really completely reinvent medical education in the United States, closed 75-80% of medical schools, and they were all rebuilt with this idea of science, rotations, experience, and so on. And essentially the model, that's the model that propelled the United States to a leadership role in the world when it came to clinical care, medical education, and medical research. Very powerful. But since its inception, it's been primarily focused on the acute treatment of disease, illness, and injury. That's what it's built to do, and that's what it does. It's not always perfect, but we now have 100 and almost 30 years of that model. And then what happened was in the 1980s, and then even more in the 1990s, we started to see that lifestyle behaviors were linked to chronic disease, and then the explosion of chronic disease, to the point where today 90% of U.S. healthcare expenditures go toward treating chronic disease, albeit a lot of it in the late stages of acute illness. So the model has been set up to treat acute care, and what we need really is as much or more of an ability to address chronic care, and primarily the prevention of chronic disease. So when Scott talks about a holistic approach to healthcare, that's really what we're talking about is overall health. And if an individual can prevent a surgery by virtue of a healthier lifestyle or a preventive behavior of some kind, that is better than the best surgery by the most skilled physician in the newest facility. So what we've ended up with today, for a whole host of reasons, and we don't have enough time to get into them right now, but if you want to know, you get a discount coupon to this incredible book right here, The Customer Revolution in Healthcare, that will explain everything to you. But we've ended up in a situation where we've got a mismatch between the facilities we have and the services we offer and the services that everyday Americans need. So overall, healthcare accounts for 10% of health status. Genetics, environment, and lifestyle choices account for the other 90%. So we're dealing with the 10%, not the 90%. And when you start talking about the way that we're going to transition, it's really with that bigger picture in mind. And there's also something very unusual about the nature of the healthcare industry. It's very mature from a services perspective. And what do I mean by that? 90+% of people who present to healthcare institutions, we know what to do, right? Can't always save them, but we know what to do. When other industries get to that level of maturity in their service offerings, they decentralize in order to get closer to customers, to lower their costs, and to improve the convenience of experience. And it's because their products and services have largely become commoditized. So healthcare from a service perspective is fairly mature. And, if we're being honest, most of what we do, or most of what the system does is reasonably routine. It's subject to the laws of commodity services. But from an organizational perspective, healthcare tends to be immature, and it's still heavily invested in high-cost, centralized delivery mechanisms. And you're even today seeing organizations doubling down on, billion-dollar centralized patient campuses. And I guess that can work if you're servicing that 10% of cases where nobody else can do it quite as well, the real solution shop stuff. But that's not going to happen in every market in multiple facilities. And if you're going to spend, hundreds of millions of dollars on a facility and do routine care, that's going to take an awful lot of appendectomies to pay for the building. So there's actually real risk associated with continuing to operate with that build it and they will come mindset, because there's enormous energy into payment reform that is trying to shift the cost of care, and you all know this, onto payers and providers. And once you start to do that, the transactional nature of healthcare and the ability to get overpaid for doing routine things disappears, and that creates real vulnerability. So that's where we were, a year ago, and then COVID came, and all COVID has done is just accelerate the pressures on the industry. We've seen organizations go from doing hardly any virtual care in their primary care offices to doing 80 to 90% of their visits as virtual care. And we've also seen, unfortunately, the real inequities that are buried into the system or built into the system as people from low income neighborhoods are dying at 3 to 4 times the rate of higher income people. And you put that together with what Scott was talking about, technology, the fact that smart money is increasingly going into asset light companies that are tech savvy and consumer oriented. And all you got to do is quote that great American philosopher Yogi Berra to come to the conclusion, the future just ain't like it used to be. and so that's kind of macro what's going on. We're in this shift, this decentralized shift to get closer to customers, to do healthcare at home, to use technology, and to focus more on well-being and health, not to the exclusion of acute care, but in equal measure. And that's what's driving much of the pressure. And lots of health systems, lots of traditional kind of providers are clinging to the fee-for-service, build it and they will come. We're too important to disrupt way of thinking, and that's just very dangerous. So you get down into individual markets, and what do you see happening? Enormous amount of consolidation, and part of that is as we go more and more to digital-based ways of accessing services, you need to have bigger, more adaptable networks of services. So if you think about hotels, for example, when Hotels.com and all of the other sites came on board, what did the traditional providers do? They got a lot bigger so they could compete with the online exchanges that didn't own any hotel rooms. All they do is they make it easier for transactions to happen, right? Just like Uber does. And so we're starting to see that in healthcare too. And part of it's for good reason, part of it's for bad reason. The good reason is it provides more capabilities, virtual integration, the ability to take risk. And if you're doing it for those reasons, you're on the right side of history. The other reason we're seeing consolidation, though, is to gain market leverage in negotiations with payers and to drive up prices, not based on value, but based on negotiating leverage. That's a dangerous game to be playing as well. You're also seeing a dramatic increase in the new types of business models and competitors coming into the marketplace. When Teladoc, the largest telemedicine provider, acquired Livongo, the largest virtual chronic disease management company, it had an implied valuation, and that happened, 4 or 5 months ago. It had an implied valuation of $44 billion. It traded at 35 times revenues. That 44 billion ironically happened to be the same market capitalization as HCA, the largest publicly traded hospital system, and they traded roughly 85% of revenues. So 35 times revenues, 85%. So the market is out there screaming that the future is in consumer, digital, retail, asset light kind of models. And with that, you're also getting changing consumption patterns. And like I mentioned earlier, when you have a baby, you start getting all this new marketing. What marketing professionals will tell you is that when an individual has a major life experience, like a baby, like a new home, like retiring, that's when you change patterns. Well, we collectively have had one major life experience called COVID-19. And so consumers are starting to develop new behaviors. And that's why, being really tuned in the way Scott and Gensler are to the experience side of things, I think will put you one step ahead of most competitors in terms of figuring out where consumers are going. And ultimately, we need a healthcare system that solves each of our individual jobs to be done. Fix us when we're broken, help us lead the best and healthiest lives possible and help us to not only sustain our health, but enhance it. And quite honestly, the healthcare system writ large really only does a good job on that first one, and that leaves the other 2/3 or the other 90% to go on. So as you kind of look forward, we're going to see, I think, larger companies and individual markets. There's going to be more risk taking. There are going to be a lot more competitors. What's Walmart going to do? Are they going to get into the insurance business? What's Optum going to do? So the landscape's going to look a lot different. And I think the right way to think about it is in tides and waves. And the underlying tide is dramatically moving toward value. It's moving toward consumerism. The ups and downs of the marketplace are the waves, and you got to not be distracted by the waves and focus on the underlying tides. And so that's where I'm going to shift, and I'm going to kind of end with that same phrase that Scott used, that these are tectonic shifts. These are like continents that are moving together and moving apart. And there's nothing you can do about them. We have to adapt to them. And quite honestly, if you think about it, and this will be the last thing I say, and then we can open it up for questions. If you think about it, if we, as the United States of America, can deliver the same or better health and healthcare to our citizens, we will free up enormous resources to pay people more money, to invest in more productive industries, to lead healthier, happier, more productive lives. And who doesn't want that as a future for the United States of America? So I wasn't intending to come back to the Athenian Creed, but if we can make this healthcare system better than we found it, we all ought to take a victory lap at the end of our careers, pat ourselves on the back, and then hand it over to the next generation. So with that, we'll take your questions.
And Dave, that's awesome. We have kind of a first question that's been put in the comments here, and I was making some notes as you were talking, and you were talking about kind of our current system and being subject to the laws of commoditization and sort of where the industry is. And the question from is about whether this infectious disease, this boomerang of infectious disease, creates an opportunity to relink health care and public health. And I touched a bit on this. I tend to think, and then it goes on to ask, what's the best mechanism to get there? Probably not hospitals. And, I think you and I would agree with that. But there is, when you were talking about, commodities, I think of this paradigm of kind of factories and distribution systems, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea that you're going to make your product at a factory, let's call it a hospital or a health campus, and you want to be able to have that be highly efficient. You want it to run hot and produce the greatest kind of units per investment. And then you want to look at how you distribute your product differently. And I'm wondering if there's a future, and this gets into payment incentives and all that stuff, or at least that's where the conversation usually starts. But isn't there a future where there are alternatives for the distribution system? So there are Walmarts, there are tech applications for those who want them. There is the primary care doctor owned by the health system for those that want that avenue. But that we're increasingly really able to kind of get at the system through multiple avenues.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And they'll be individualized. Services will be tailored to your needs. I back when we could go to conferences, I attended the big health conference in Vegas, HLTH conference in Vegas. And I listened to one millennial entrepreneur after another give a presentation, and my initial thought was, I can't believe how overconfident all these people are. Based on, but what came through loud and clear is they talked about their different business models for companies like Hims and Hers and so on. Is millennials as an age group, they can't stand hospitals. They mostly don't even like doctors. That when they want services, they want them access to them 24/7. If they need to talk to somebody, they're perfectly happy doing it through a chat or a video function. And oh, by the way, if you need more services than that, then we can, step it up and go to a specialist, and we can get you your packages or whatever prescriptions or other products you need delivered to your home, tomorrow. And we like to think, you and I are boomers, we like to think we're the ones that have changed the world, and maybe we have, but I got to say the way these younger people that are digital natives kind of think about interacting with the marketplace, the current healthcare system isn't set up to do that at all. And so we're getting all kinds of new companies, and, Walgreens and CVS are within 5 miles of 75% of the US population. To think they're not going to be a big part of chronic disease management in 5 to 10 years, I don't know what you'd have to be smoking to believe that. So.
I mean, I would think that the chronic disease management is going to be just because of the scale of chronic disease, diabetes, obesity, and all the hypertension, that those are the things where there's going to be the greatest kind of investment and potential return for these disruptors, and those are the things that maybe the health systems need to think about, either partnerships or other vehicles, or maybe that's a place where they say, that's not the core of our core expertise, and somebody can kind of do that better. And but one way or another, that might be the piece that leaves first.
Right, and that's where this concept of platforming comes in. The more and more the marketplace goes to exchanges. So there's this company in Texas called Colonoscopy Assist, for example, and it's a pure exchange company. You go on, you type in your zip code, and they will give you any number of GI procedures, like a colonoscopy. Never costs more than $1,200. They connect you with a GI practice, their standard protocols, and so on. So they don't own the GI practices. But what they do is they facilitate this connection between people that need a colonoscopy and those that provide it. So the more and more we move toward that type of way of distributing services, which is basically the way Amazon and Walmart and all the other big retailers are doing it, then it's important to have these platform companies that can connect these capabilities in a seamless way with a lot of digital connectivity, so that you go where you need to go, your records travel with you, they know who you are when you get there, maybe you've done a little bit beforehand to get ready for them. It's not this idea of going down and, waiting in a doctor's office for half an hour for a nurse to put you in a room, for you to wait 15 minutes so you can talk for 3 minutes to a doctor and then forget whatever it is she or he told you. It's going to be on demand, on time, and very, very customer focused. I, for the life of me, can't understand why hospitals are trying to get into the urgent care business by themselves. I mean, I've interviewed a number of these companies like Go Health, and they have it down to a science. I mean, the footprint, the staffing, the emphasis on net promoter scores. They ought to do what Hartford Health did, which was they partnered with Go Health, and you got Go Health at Hartford Health. But I also wanted to come back to the question about public health, because we've had woeful underinvestment in public health and are paying an enormous price for it right now. And it's hard to believe that we won't make the investment in public health professionals and services so that we can get ahead of infectious diseases, which look like they're going to kind of come back with a greater vengeance than we've seen in quite a while. Now, the good news there is the ability to develop, manufacture, and distribute a vaccine for a novel virus in under a year is a scientific accomplishment, collective scientific accomplishment, on a par with going to the moon or the Manhattan Project. And it has all sorts of implications for how we're going to treat not only viruses, but any type of molecular entity that's attacking the body, like cancer. So we could be on the dawn of an entirely new way of how we treat disease. And if we can combine that with a much more effective, it's almost scientific approach to wellness, then we will do both a better job of not needing as much pure acute healthcare services as as we have in the past, and then having much more tailored, targeted, laser-focused, personalized services when we do need them.
Hey, so Dave, I know that we're getting to the end of our time here. There was one other question. Maybe we can deal with it. We can kind of both sort of use this as sort of a wrap up. And it was from an audience member that was asking kind of how it went back to my initial comment about how the chief facility officer needs to be part of the strategic conversation. And I think the question is, kind of how does, from your point of view, how do folks that are at a conference like this begin to start adopting the mindset that beyond kind of schedule and budget and those kinds of things, they're really able to be part. I mean, much like the large corporations have a corporate real estate function where they are really adjusting and tuning the asset base to the needs of the corporation. And yes, they're providing environments that people work in. But healthcare has been so risk focused, and it's always been Six Sigma on making sure that we don't have a stock out and we don't have a failure. And, that's clearly important in this industry. But there's this mind shift to kind of almost managing the balance sheet in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I didn't set out today to do so many commercials for Gensler, but I think if you look at...
That's fine, Dave. You're welcome to give any...
But if you look at what's happening to commercial real estate, for example, where huge percentages of the workforce are not going to fully go back and work in offices in the way they have before. I mean, the facility managers have been enormously important in terms of, one, making sure when people do come into the office, they're safe and you've got the air filters and all the things that are necessary, touchless entry and so on. But also being at the ground level, really the forward troops in seeing, feeling how people are experiencing offices and working in offices going forward that can report back to the central nervous system about these types of experiences. It's a little bit like team of teams approach, where we only won the war in Iraq once we started pushing responsibility forward to troops with the information and the autonomy to make decisions, because we were fighting an enemy that was kind of killing us in real time, and we were going back to central for plans on what to do. I think in the future, there's going to just be a lot more that has to happen real time on the front lines, influenced by what people are seeing, in the buildings, in the hospitals, in the places where they interact with the public. So that to me, to the extent that facility people can be the eyes and ears of how people can benefit more from the system, better health, better healthcare, better experience, and then feed that in, really become part of the evolving value equation. You could do an enormous amount of good for your company in that way.
Yeah. Wow, Dave. Well, it is always, you and I get together, we can always go for hours, but I know we are done. We are finished our time here. We have one question, Carl. I will follow up with you offline on it. And Dave, thanks so much. This has been fun.
Yeah, as always, Scott. Always a blast.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.